big fan of the whole Playboy concept, was willing to basically invite me into his life. And I flew down to Mar-a-Lago with him and his then wife Marla and their little girl Tiffany on his jet, and I hung out at Mar-a-Lago with him. And I, had a chance to really talk to him and observe him in action. And I came away feeling like this is one of the most loathsome human beings I've ever met in my life. Just I don't know what I could say. I would recommend that you read the story. But someone who throws, temper tantrums, who lies about everything, and just about everything he told me turned out not to be true. I witnessed him throw a big temper tantrum out on his tennis courts where he didn't like the way that the electric pumps were mounted on the water fountains between these beautiful clay courts that they have down there at Mar-a-Lago. So he started kicking and pulling and yanked up the motor and broke the water lines and flooded all the courts. And then he was embarrassed, and he knew that I had witnessed this. So he came up to me and he said, well, I guess, that'll have to be in the story. And I said, yeah, pretty much, that's going to be in the story. And so then he, I think, started to worry about it. And I remember on the flight home, he essentially just offered me the opportunity to write his next book, which was, clearly a bribe because he knew that he probably wasn't going to like the story that I wrote about him. So, I've never had anybody behave like that and with me. And I mean, he was on his best behavior, I presume, because he knew I was there to observe him and write about him. So to me, the idea at that point that he would someday be president of the United States is just so laughable. Life just continues to throw curves that I would never have imagined.
Yeah, well, that's always been my perception of him. And again, all of the animus I have expressed toward him, about him on this podcast, is driven by an impression that certainly predates his run for office. I've never met him, and I haven't really focused on him, but he's been famous for decades now, and he has always struck me as just the most morally shallow person in the public sphere.
And also just outrageously incompetent. I mean, he, at the time I was hanging out with him, had destroyed his businesses. They were all being run by court-appointed businessmen because he had run them all into the ground. And in fact, at the time, he told me that, he'd lost all his money, and at one point he was like the poorest man in Fifth Avenue. But the reason that he survived that period was not because he was brilliant, but because so many people had invested so heavily that Donald's sinking would have destroyed a lot of other people. And so they basically shored him back up. And at that point, he stopped being a businessman completely. He's
the real estate version of North Korea.
Yeah, he stopped being a businessman. He became just a brand name. And then, he would boast about that. I mean, if, you put my name, Trump, on something, and it'll be